The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting washingtonpost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness.
A third indictment for former President Donald Trump. This one for his role in the January 6th attack and attempts at overturning the 2020 presidential election. 4 counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding. Welcome to this special report from the newsroom of the Washington Post. I'm Rhonda Colvin. We await more news from the Department of Justice this evening about the specifics of what Trump faces. But for now, let's talk about what we do know. I'm joined today with opinions columnist James Hohmann. James, we have an indictment. We know we're going to hear some details forthcoming from the special counsel. What do we know? And, let's go back into earlier in the day. How did we find out this was coming?
Yeah, so we have the 45-page indictment now, and the text is up on our website so people can read it for themselves. But this is a situation where Donald Trump, just like the last time he was indicted, the first time a former president had ever been indicted. This is the second time. He also had announced a few days early that it was coming and that his lawyers had been notified. Similarly here, Trump put out the word that he was going to get indicted before the Justice Department did. What we have seen in this document is sort of a lot of what we were expecting. It's a lot of the charges, frankly, that many of the January 6th Capitol rioters have faced. Related to a conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding and basically blocking the certification of the electoral votes. What Jack Smith does in this 45-page indictment, Rhonda, is he says this is not about lying and claiming falsely that you won the election. That's free speech. That's protected by the First Amendment. This is about a conspiracy to defraud the American people, to take away their franchise. And essentially, it really does heavily revolve around the idea that Trump knew he had lost the election and that he was doing various things to try to get those fake electors to cast a ballot so that he could stay in power. Now, the indictment names 6 unindicted co-conspirators. So far, we've been able to make out about 4 of them. The 5th and 6th are a little hairy, but a lot of this is stuff that we learned during those January 6th committee hearings that we covered and you were there for in the room. But essentially, the 45-page document lays out in almost a narrative, a blow-by-blow, sometimes minute-by-minute detail, how Donald Trump, then president, was talking with Rudy Giuliani, John Eastman, Sidney Powell, Jeff Clark, and others, including people on his campaign, to try to move the wheels of what the government calls a conspiracy to defraud the United States, to obstruct an official proceeding, and a conspiracy against rights, sort of a general term that is under a part of the U.S. Code that was passed right after the Civil War during Reconstruction to protect the voting rights of people generally instead of individuals specifically.
Yeah, you mentioned a few really important things, that there are co-conspirators listed in this indictment, and we've been leafing through it since we've got it moments ago. Let's talk about some of the people who were involved in these schemes. As you mentioned, we covered it when we covered January 6th, congressional hearings on January 6th. But who are these people who we might want to listen out for?
So we kind of lived through this, right? And it's a reminder of during those weeks, it was obviously 2 months passed between Election Day and January 6th. And the conspiracy that's alleged here isn't just the horrible awfulness of that day where the Capitol got ransacked. It is remember when Rudy Giuliani was flying around the country testifying before state legislatures, going to Arizona and Pennsylvania. Trump was calling up the Georgia Secretary of State and saying, I just need you to help find me 10,000 votes. That is part of the indictment. Rusty Bowers, who was one of the star witnesses before the January 6th committee, then the Republican Speaker of the House in Arizona, he described during his January 6th testimony, Rudy Giuliani calling him as he was driving, I believe, home from church, and basically outlining this effort to get Arizona to send its electoral votes to be for Trump instead of Biden. Biden carried the state. And so it's very clear in context, based on Rusty Bowers' public testimony, that the person who called Rusty Bowers was Rudy Giuliani. So even though none of these co-conspirators are actually named, just based on quotes and based on the hearings and the reporting that's been done, we sort of can so far identify at least 4 of the 6. I think we'll probably be able to figure out the other 2 momentarily.
And we should make that distinction, right? That it's not just about the events of January 6th, the violence, of course, that we witnessed, but it is the schemes that led up to it, the fake electors plot, which is also involved in this indictment. Let's talk about that for a minute, because there was news today out of Michigan, and it seems like states are moving ahead, looking into what may have happened there when it came to the fake electors plot, where Trump and allies are alleged to have figured out a way to try to overturn the election by creating a new slate of electors that would have said that they are casting their votes for Trump instead of Biden, who actually won.
Yeah, absolutely. So in Michigan, the Attorney General there recently indicted several, I think all of the fake electors, including a woman in her 80s, who had signed up to be part of this. And today, the Republican candidate for Attorney General, for Secretary of State last year, he was indicted along with someone else for sort of post-election, during that 2-month window, getting election machines, and he's charged with allegedly tampering with them. This was all part of an effort to, say we looked into these machines and we found evidence of fraud. No such evidence ever emerged at all, but there were all these efforts across the country by Trump and his allies and people who were trying to help out, people who were being encouraged by the Rudy Giuliani's and Sidney Powell's of the world to go look for fraud. So Michigan, Arizona, we could see something soon in Georgia. There are a lot of states that are at the local level prosecuting people for basically interfering in the certification of the election.
We also have with us our colleague, Amber Phillips. She's the author of the 5-Minute Fix. Amber, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at the indictment or some of the charges that are laid out in it, but what's surprising or stands out to you right now as we are here at another historic moment?
Yeah, thank you for having me. And I'm reading the indictment just like we all are right now. I think what stands out is that this indictment doesn't mince words. It essentially alleges that Trump orchestrated a subversion of democracy. It says, despite having lost, the defendant, being Trump, was determined to remain in power. So for more than 2 months after the election, he spread lies about the election fraud. And it ties everything it lists in these 45 pages back to one point, that Trump targeted, and I'm quoting from the indictment here, Rhonda, a bedrock function of the United States federal government. And that's the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. And then it spends the next 44 pages explaining the myriad ways in which Trump was told there was no fraud by top officials, pushed these lies anyway, and pressured people from local state officials and even city officials in Pennsylvania, all the way up to his own vice president, to overturn the results anyway.
And we've heard from former President Trump, we've heard from his team. They are saying that, why didn't these charges come out earlier, 2.5 years ago? That's what they're kind of defending right now, that this took too long and this is some sort of interference into their campaign for 2024. When it comes to the former president and his reaction to these indictments, is there anything that stands out to you?
Yeah, I think that the timing absolutely plays into former President Trump's argument that this is all some kind of scheme to undermine his presidential election. Let me state outright, Rhonda, there is absolutely no evidence of that. In fact, the Justice Department's, when Trump announced he was running for president again, specifically appointed this special counsel, Jack Smith, to try to give Biden some distance from this. But that being said, our colleagues at the Washington Post, who cover the Justice Department, are deeply sourced there, have reported that FBI officials and top Justice Department officials were really nervous to even start this investigation. And so there was a lot of arguing within these halls of the Justice Department for months, maybe even a year, before this investigation actually got going. And the end result is you have this indictment coming out. You're absolutely right, Rhonda, as Trump is running for president. So there's no evidence at all that this is being done to try to undermine President Trump and his run for president, but it plays exactly into his argument.
Yeah, that's a good point, because we also learned this week from financial disclosures that he spent a lot of money from his Save America PAC to pay for his legal fees. Of course, this is the third indictment. We might be getting another one in the Fulton County, Georgia case. But it appears that he has been using that money fundraised from donors to pay legal fees. Are you able to tell us a little bit more about that and how Trump is running, even though there is so much legal baggage right now?
Yeah, I'm sorry, you were tossing to me. I'm sorry, Rhonda.
Yes, yeah, Amber. And, I'll ask that to James as well. Trump has been able to fundraise off of this, and it seems like he's doing okay. His donors seem not to mind these legal issues, but we're also seeing that he's spending a fair amount of money from his PAC to pay for his legal fees.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Rhonda. Our amazing colleagues at the Washington Post have reported that there are some in Trump's circle who believe he's running for president in part to stay out of jail. I've been pinging former federal prosecutors to say, can he do that? And the answer is, we just don't know what a jury's going to decide with regard to a former president, whether they're going to put him in jail. I get differing answers, but the effect of running for president, as you illustrate so clearly, is that he is able to raise money, a lot of money, and put it to these many, many, many legal fronts, because he's got lawyers upon lawyers upon lawyers. And this is now his third indictment with dozens and dozens of specific charges. Overall, he faces years, maybe even decades in jail. He's got a lot of legal vulnerabilities, and that's very costly. So there is a theory in the political world, as emphasized by reporting from our colleagues at the Washington Post, that he has been running for president in order to try to stay out of jail and pay for all these legal fees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's interesting is this is going to be a D.C. jury. The classified documents case, in some ways more open and shut, more traditional. Lots of people charged with taking classified documents, obstruction of justice, very well trod legally, even though this is a first of its kind case against a former president. But it's a Miami jury. The judicial area is a part of the country Donald Trump won. In Washington, D.C., where these crimes are alleged to have taken place. It will be a very, very different jury pool. Still, though, you need to have beyond a reasonable doubt as the legal standard, and you really only need to convince one juror that the government doesn't have the case. And so it's going to be really interesting as we hear momentarily from Jack Smith, the special counsel, how strong their case is.
We are now going to go to the special counsel, Jack Smith, for his remarks.
Good evening. Today, an indictment was unsealed, charging Donald J. Trump with conspiring to defraud the United States, conspiring to disenfranchise voters, and conspiring and attempting to obstruct an official proceeding. The indictment was issued by a grand jury of citizens here in the District of Columbia, and it sets forth the crimes charged in detail. I encourage everyone to read it in full. The attack on our nation's capital on January 6, 2021, was an unprecedented assault on the seat of American democracy. As described in the indictment, it was fueled by lies. Lies by the defendant targeted at obstructing a bedrock function of the U.S. government, the nation's process of collecting, counting, and certifying the results of the presidential election. The men and women of law enforcement who defended the U.S. Capitol on on January 6th are heroes. They are patriots and they are the very best of us. They did not just defend a building or the people sheltering in it. They put their lives on the line to defend who we are as a country and as a people. They defended the very institutions and principles that define the United States. Since the attack on our Capitol, the Department of Justice has remained committed to ensuring accountability for those criminally responsible for what happened that day. This case is brought consistent with that commitment, and our investigation of other individuals continues. In this case, my office will seek a speedy trial so that our evidence can be tested in court and judged by a jury of citizens. In the meantime, I must emphasize that the indictment is only an allegation and that the defendant must be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. I would like to thank the members of the Federal Bureau of Investigation who are working on this investigation with my office, as well as the many career prosecutors and law enforcement agents from around the country who have worked on previous January 6th investigations. These women and men are public servants of the very highest order, and it is a privilege to work alongside them. Thank you.
Why didn't you charge any of the other co-conspirators, Mr. Smith?
Are you worried this gets back to the election?
Are you planning to bring any other charges against more individuals?
Special Counsel Jack Smith laying out the charges former President Trump now faces in connection to the 2020 presidential election and the January 6th Capitol attack. 4 counts, including conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding. This is live coverage from the Washington Post. I'm Rhonda Colvin with James Homan and Amber Phillips. So another short, brief set of remarks from the special counsel. I know what stood out to me is he spent time talking about the Capitol Hill officers and the D.C. Metro officers who defended the Capitol that day. What stood out to you?
Yeah, it's a short 2.5-minute speech, and about half of it was really devoted squarely to that. I think that that's pushing back against this rhetoric that we're already hearing from Trump's opponents reacting to this indictment. Ron DeSantis saying this is the politicization of the FBI. And Jack Smith just now, career prosecutor, saying no. You know, he's not saying it that explicitly, but this isn't, these are nonpartisan career civil servants who are heroes, was the word he used. Not just the people who defended the Capitol, but the FBI agents and the career Justice Department officials who have been working on this investigation, trying to ensure that there's accountability, as he put it, criminal responsibility for the actions of January 6th. And you're absolutely right. I was struck by saying, it was this unprecedented assault on the Capitol, and that the law enforcement officers who were there, more than 140 of them injured that day, they didn't just defend the Capitol, they were defending democracy. The 2 kind of newsy pieces of that statement that really struck me were, first, that our investigation of other individuals continues. So just because these 6 co-conspirators haven't faced charges today doesn't mean that they're not going to, or that other people aren't going to. More than 1,000 people have now been charged by the Justice Department in conjunction with the insurrection. The second thing that was news is that Smith said he will seek a speedy trial. That doesn't necessarily mean he'll get one. Trump obviously has an incentive to drag this out, to delay it, as you were just talking about with Amber Phillips. But I think if Smith had his way, they would test this case as soon as possible. They could get this docketed before the Iowa caucuses next February.
Yeah, Amber, I want to bring you in on this. This is the second time that we've heard from Jack Smith on federal charges, and he keeps his remarks very brief. What stood out to you? And also, why does someone like Jack Smith, bringing historical indictments and charges to Donald Trump, why does he have to make a public presentation?
Yeah, I think he wants to acknowledge the severity of this, not just for the Justice Department, but for the nation. He went out there and he stressed these are only allegations, but these are very, very serious charges. And if you read the indictment, a theme he keeps coming back to is that one person, one vote Donald Trump tried to undermine that, Jack Smith alleges in this indictment that's laid out here. And so I think what he wanted to do was, in a way, address the nation, knowing that we would carry forward his words, but keep it short because he doesn't want to be the pitcher and a character in this, even though he knows he will. And Trump has spent months and months and months going after Jack Smith, both for this case and the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case as well. But I also thought it was interesting, Rhonda, even though his remarks are short, he comes across as forthright. He was a former war crimes prosecutor for The Hague. And I remember when Trump was getting arraigned for the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case, reporters were surprised to see Jack Smith flying from DC to Miami and to be in Florida in court for that arraignment. There's this ethos I feel like Jack Smith is trying to present of someone who's not going to back down in the face of intimidation from Trump. And I think that's what his remarks were trying to convey tonight, while also underscoring the severity of these charges.
Right.
Yeah, totally.
Oh, I was going to say, he also remarked about thanking those who had worked on previous January 6 investigations. So we should point out that this, even though he was named special counsel in November, this has still been a long time coming, basically. It kind of started right after the 6th, especially with Congress when they wanted to investigate it. So let's talk about that this is not just an overnight decision. This is, the result of something that's taken a while.
Yeah, and that's, one of the pushback from Donald Trump in one of his many Truth Social posts responding to the news of this indictment is, why did they wait 2.5 years? And the Post has had some excellent reporting about sort of the internal fight inside the government. I mean, there was a lot of understandable nervousness and anxiety about indicting a former president. It had never been done before, but it is a very common prosecutorial tactic to sort of work your way from the bottom up, to work your way up the ladder. And we have really seen what has been described as one of the most ambitious law enforcement investigations in U.S. history. You just think about the sheer amount of video footage from the Capitol on January 6th. You were there that day, and so many people who were there and left, and they're still arresting people for breaching the Capitol. But the wheels of justice can take a while to spin. Another thing that Jack Smith said in his speech was that people should read the indictment in full. And I really think, more so, and this was true in the classified documents thing too, more so than in a normal indictment, because this is such a historically unusual thing to happen, they really lay out in just granular detail. Jack Smith also said that during his last speech right after the classified documents indictment. He said, read it in full. I'd encourage everyone to look at it. And the idea is that these are facts, that this is driven by facts, that this is not some kind of prosecutorial vendetta, as Donald Trump keeps alleging.
Yeah, Amber, I know that you follow, all the latest polling, and what we've seen recently is that Donald Trump is sustaining a lead in the Republican field for the nomination. Can you tell us a little bit about from your own reporting, what might be behind his popularity among his base, who seem not to be concerned or at least bothered with all of these indictments?
Rhonda, you read my mind, because as James is talking, I was literally pulling up the latest polls we have from the 2024 Republican presidential race, and it shows Trump has been indicted twice, now 3 times. But at the time of this poll from the New York Times Siena College, he was indicted twice. He's got a massive lead. He's growing it over his closest challenger, DeSantis. Trump leads by 54%. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, 17%. Everyone else is like 1, 2, 3%. Nobody can chase him after 2 indictments. Now he's got 3 indictments. This one is serious. But the indictment itself lays out mostly publicly known information, right? A lot of it is Donald Trump's tweets, his speech on the ellipse at January 6th, moments before the attack, for example. And so it's very hard to see why this would change Donald Trump's standing in the polls right now, especially when his opponents have been completely unwilling to attack him for any of these indictments, maybe a little bit here and there, but they're not all ganging up on him. And so my understanding is that based on polling from the New York Times and talking to Republican strategists and other polling that we've seen, that Republican primary voters are invested in Trump. They like DeSantis, but they just do not feel like anyone else comes close to being, I'm pulling out quotes that came from this New York Times poll, a strong leader, getting things done, able to beat Joe Biden. Okay, that's just, Donald Trump owns the lane of representing Republican primary voters, at least for their party and for the nation. And no one else has been able to catch him despite a summer of indictments.
Yeah, and James, this is also before what we are expecting, some announcements coming from Fulton County, Georgia. When we look at all of the current indictments and the ones that are potentially coming, are there any differences? This case, of course, is related to January 6th. The Fulton County one is related to the election as well, but do any of these stand out as more serious or more of a potential that he will have to face punishment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird dynamic with what Amber's talking about, which is absolutely true, and you feel it on the ground. You know, in Iowa, there was a Republican Party dinner Friday night. The one person who really criticized Trump got booed off stage, and he said Trump's running to stay out of prison. As Trump's legal jeopardy increases, which it is, you know, these are very serious federal criminal charges. These are felonies. He becomes politically stronger, you know, and obviously he's not raising as much after the second indictment as the first, and all of that can be true. But he is in the driver's seat for the Republican nomination. Now, we've kind of gotten used to this place where we say, oh, well, you know, will this be the thing that changes Republican voters' minds? And certainly there is some fatigue, there's some desire for something different, but it's hard to say if everything else hasn't, you know, what is going to be the straw that would break the camel's back of Trump's really very strong support in the Republican field.
And James, we don't yet have confirmed details of what exactly is next, but we will be covering an arraignment now. Now that we have an indictment, usually what's next is an arraignment.
And there are reports out there, you know, that it'll be later this week. That we do know for sure that the judge who has been randomly assigned to hear this case is named Tanya Chutkin. She was an Obama appointee. She has been on the bench since 2014. She will oversee this case. So she will handle the arraignment and, you know, however long this process goes. She's 61. She was born in Jamaica. She went to George Washington University, went to University of Pennsylvania for law school, worked in private practice, was a public defender, and was a partner at Boies Schiller, a big firm, for 12 years until President Obama appointed her. You know, we've seen President Trump attack some of the other judges who have been randomly assigned these cases, and the sad commentary about the era that we live in. We did see a state judge in Georgia yesterday strike down an effort by Trump to throw out preemptively the Georgia charges because he said that Fani Willis, the Fulton County District Attorney in Atlanta, was biased against him. So, you know, we'll see what comes out of Georgia. There might be new facts there. You know, even here, just because you know, this 45-page indictment is very detailed, but there's obviously a lot of evidence that Jack Smith has that he is not showing his cards yet. So more information could come out. We obviously saw the superseding indictment with the Mar-a-Lago case. So there could be a superseding indictment here where some of the co-conspirators maybe get indicted. But the point of it is that in Atlanta, there was this grand jury. In D.C., there's been this grand jury. They have information, access to information. They can compel testimony that us journalists can't. You know, we can work our sources. We can, you know, work really hard to peel back the onion and get as close to the core of what happened as we can. But, you know, the law enforcement has powers that journalists don't. And so there are certainly details that even this heavily reported, you know, event that still aren't known. And so it's going to be fascinating to see during some of the pretrial motions what comes out.
Yeah, I was just thinking earlier today that last year this time, in fact, I think it was last week, last year, we were covering the January 6th panel's investigation in the House, and they recommended charges to Donald Trump. Some of them don't match up to what the Justice Department landed on, but they did supply information to the Justice Department and to Fulton County for their investigations. So you are kind of seeing the fruit of what they did.
And that was a bipartisan effort. Obviously, Adam Kinzinger and Liz Cheney, not Trumpers, but they were Republican members of Congress who totally were bought in to this idea that Trump should face criminal consequences for what he did on January 6th. And for back a year ago, you're absolutely right. It didn't seem like this was going to happen. It seemed like Merrick Garland was too hesitant. He was too nervous about, taking on Trump and being accused of politicizing the Justice Department. Clearly, he empowered Jack Smith to make this decision, and Jack Smith has decided to move ahead. The FBI has put obviously a lot of resources into this for a long time. And again, it gets to that question of what do they know that we still don't? But to your earlier question from a few minutes ago, like what is the strongest case against Trump? I mean, both of these federal indictments are much, much stronger than the New York case related to business records. I mean, these are very damning indictments. Obviously, as Jack Smith said, innocent until proven guilty. Everyone gets their day in court. But the conduct laid out here and the 4 statutes they're accusing Trump of violating, I mean, it's a very, very serious matter.
Yeah, and to your point earlier, it is highly readable from what we were able to see before we went on air. It's very readable and understandable. Amber Phillips, I want to bring you back in to give us your final thoughts about the day and what you're going to be looking at moving forward.
Yeah, I'm thinking, Rhonda, before this indictment came out, I talked to a former federal prosecutor served under Obama, Trump, Biden administrations, and he said, listen, you're not going to charge the President of the United States with something serious unless you have real solid evidence. And so I'm reading the indictment going through the evidence. And to that effect, what the indictment alleges is that Trump essentially directed a network of efforts to overturn the popular vote in swing states he lost, and then that he incited violence and attack on the Capitol when he couldn't do that. It's a story that has become familiar to Americans, but it's laid out very clearly in this indictment. And what I'm combing through in the evening to come are specific pieces of evidence to essentially to prove these very serious allegations against the former president.
Well, thank you, Amber, and to James. Another historic day in the United States as former President Donald Trump is indicted a 3rd time, this time by special counsel Jack Smith on charges including conspiracy to defraud the United States and obstruction of an official proceeding. This is a developing story, one that the newsroom of the Washington Post will continue to report on tonight and in the coming days and weeks. We'll bring you the latest as it unfolds. For now, I'm Rhonda Colvin. Have a good evening.
The Washington Post newsroom delivers breaking events around the world as they happen. Unrivaled reporting from the journalists you've come to trust. To get the facts fast and meet the challenges of today head on. Get the news that matters most with a special offer by visiting WashingtonPost.com/watch. Subscribing unlocks instant access, bringing you the Post's award-winning coverage anytime, any place. Because democracy dies in darkness.